We have Ken Good on the line with us today, a professional bondsman, Texas bail attorney, board member of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. And I have the privilege of speaking to him today about criminal justice reform, which with the election cycle we just had, I believe is something that needs to be talked about, especially ahead of what has already begun to be the 2024 election cycle. That didn't take long, less than 24 hours after the midterms. People were already talking Trump this, Trump that, who's going to be the nominee. I mean, I think now in this politicized climate that we have, election cycles never really end. It's just one constant election cycle. Nobody really sits down and decides to do what they said that they would do or work on what they said that they would work on. But that's why I have Ken Good on this morning to talk to us about that. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Good.
Thank you so much for having me, and please call me Ken. This has been just a crazy election cycle. Nothing that was supposed to happen happened, and I probably the reasons why it didn't happen will not be the reasons that we say it didn't happen. It'll be interesting as we go forward for the next 6 months.
Yeah, I think everybody grossly miscalculated what people were going to be voting on. The morning show that I'm on, we have a diverse set of opinions because I'm a 20-something that works in politics. And so I bring that perspective. I bring the young person's perspective to the table. But then we have Tim Jones, who has been a very successful politician, being Speaker of the House, and Don Luzader, who's been on the journalistic media side of things. And so none of us agreed on what we thought people were voting on. So Ken, you come from a criminal justice attorney background. Tell us the 50,000-foot view on what you think happened this election cycle and why we had the results we did.
Well, I'll tell you what I thought was going to be the results, which turned out not to be true. I thought that this would be the first election in several cycles where we would overcome identity politics, and I thought public safety would be the bullet that would get through identity politics. Well, that turned out not to be true. And so probably just a week after the election and, all the shock just starting to wear off, I would say two things probably influenced this election more than anything else. I think the young vote, maybe yourself, came out in larger numbers than anticipated, and I think that was a result of the student loan giveaway that is not going to happen because it's illegal. So I think it was all just a political move. Mm-hmm. And I think probably I would say two other things. The Trump making the election about Trump instead of about Biden. And I think along with that, almost this little threat that came out at the end of the last week, reelect us or there will be, I would say war. And, the Republicans weren't saying elect us or there will be war. And so I think that influenced this election. We've had that happen before where one party comes up and stomps their feet and says, reelect us or there will be all-out war. And it actually happened. So this isn't the first time that's been successful. And I think those are probably a week after with the shocks just now starting to wear off. I would say those are probably the two things that influenced the election more than I thought they would.
Yeah, and we're speaking to Ken Good, Texas bail attorney and board member for the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. Ken, I am just shocked sometimes when I look at some of these blue cities, these blue states that are the most overrun with crime. I mean, I don't see a kid being able to walk down the street with a sane parent. Or, you look at Seattle and Portland where it feels like anarchy. I mean, they are still voting on, like you said, identity politics and abortion and all of the transgender issues and LGBT. At what point do people step back and realize that you can't get to those issues if you don't have safe streets, if you don't have police funded, if you do not have, your basic needs met with an economy that's thriving? Like, who cares about LGBTQ issues if you can't even put food on your table? So it shocks me, especially when I look at Seattle and Portland. From your criminal justice perspective, why do you think it is that the cities that have the most crazy, out of control crime are the ones who have voters that are ignoring it?
Well, I think you have to go back and look at their histories. The history is those areas have already failed schools. those areas have already failed families because families don't stay together. And then you have rampant drug use in those areas, and you have just large numbers of homeless populations with mental health problems. And so those people that are stuck there, because everybody else that can get out has gotten out. The people that are remain there are stuck. They can't get out. They can't afford to. They have no money to move out with. They're just trapped there. And so they're looking at it going, they're just at a loss. And so it's kind of like when you look at the politicians, and so they're just wanting to say who to blame. And the politicians are saying, well, we're going to start decriminalizing crime. They don't say that. They say, well, we just think that you're being picked on. Your race is being picked on, and we're putting a larger number of you in jail. Yeah. Just ignore that it was a minority on minority crime, usually, especially in those areas. And it was probably a minority prosecutor, and probably a minority police officer that arrested them, and probably a minority judge that oversaw their case. But they're still saying, you've been picked on, and so we need to alleviate that. And the fix is we're now going to fail the criminal justice system. The takeaway is this isn't sustainable. This cannot continue. We will either fix it or we will go to anarchy because, in the Old West, people wouldn't allow anarchy to take place for very long. That's why we had mobs. That's why we had the posse. That's why we'd have mob rule. And we have all these stories in our past that we came together to overcome. We cannot have this anarchy because who steps into the void? Who's stepping into the void in these big urban areas now? Organized crime, gangs, career criminals, and they're making a killing off of this. And they'll continue to do it until we decide that we will not allow it to continue.
Absolutely. Ken Good here, Texas bail attorney, board member for the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. Ken, knowing all of that and following up on what you've just said, what's your response then to the John Fettermans of the world who get up and say, hey, second-degree murder convicts, let's just release them all. Let's just put them back into society. There's just there's just a lack of agreement on what criminal justice reform should look like or does look like based on what side of the aisle you're on.
Well, before last week, I would have said, well, there's no compromise with these people. We need to vote them out. We are getting to a place in our country where we have people who believe public safety means one thing, and we have another group that believes public safety means something else. I was hopeful that the Speaker of the House's, situation in her home would have an impact because, for the first time, suddenly we have one side, the John Fettermans of the world care about crime, but it was only because it was against a politician of their party. They don't care about crime when it's against a politician of a different party or when it's against the general public. So for the first time, and I was hoping the public would notice that they only cared about crime because it was against the spouse of the sitting speaker of their party. They wouldn't have cared if it was a different politician of a different party. They don't care if it's part of just against the public. So I think the problem is where we're headed is we're going to go into different areas where one county believes in public safety. It'd be like in Harris County. Montgomery County right next to it in Texas has a sign as you enter the county that says, here we fund the police and we prosecute crime. Criminals beware.
And
that's where we're headed.
And talk to us a little bit about this idea of preventative detention and what it is and why we should be concerned about it and why conservatives and liberals alike seem to be coming out and speaking against this. Why is this even in the discussion?
Well, this is a complex issue, but on preventive detention, we've had this this pendulum that has sprung. It swings and it swings. And so we're now at the very far left of the swing of the pendulum where we're decriminalizing crime. But when the pendulum starts to swing back, and it has in parts of our country as we've rolled back with some of these bad reforms, but the opposite, the strong swing to the opposite is we're just going to detain everybody where we don't even look at a person individually. We just say, what crime are you charged with? Well, we're going to detain you. And that is really bad for our society because it fills up our jails and we have no room to hold anybody accountable. So if someone fails to show up for court, well, we no longer have a room because we're detaining everybody that's charged with a crime that's across the, that we've just decided arbitrarily. And so we run out of jail space because we haven't been building jails in a decade, even though our population's been increasing. So anything that creates chaos, which a jail that's full is going to create chaos in the criminal justice system. Anything that prevents the judges from holding people accountable so the criminals know, hey, I don't have to go to court. They don't have room in the jail to hold me, so I can just steal as many Cadillac converters as I want, and they can't do anything about it because they don't have any room, and they can't even prosecute me. And they've started dismissing those types of cases. Like Harris County, they're dismissing 82% of misdemeanor crimes for the last 2 years. Then that just creates a situation where it's just, whether you intended it or not, it's decriminalization of crime. And the more chaos, the more crime higher up. We're now going to be decriminalizing felonies. At least in California, they changed felonies to misdemeanors before they decriminalized it. We're now at the point that criminals just think that they have a green light to do whatever they want. And until we get control over that, it's just going to continue to get worse. And the pendulum swinging back to holding everybody will make it a lot worse, and it'll just drive to more chaos.
And marry that with the conversation of these out-of-control Soros prosecutors who seem to be just letting people run loose on the streets, that the ones that really should be taking up that jail space. Why does there seem to be a disconnect with these highly educated individuals who make it to the point where they're prosecutors of the law? Like, why can't they get this?
Well, I think they get it. I just think that they're politicians that have found a way to be elected where they could never be elected before, and they're signing a blood oath to the Soros creed, and they're getting millions of dollars thrown their way. I was on a forum 2 weeks ago in Tennessee with their new DA, who was Soros funded, and I was pointing out that before he was elected, their misdemeanor cases in that county in Tennessee had a 60-something, 70-something% dismissal rate, and he just said, "Well, I don't think that's a bad thing," and I'm like, "Really?" So you're either doing one of two things. You're decriminalizing crime, or your prosecutors are picking on innocent people. There's no in between here, because your job is to prosecute crime. And if you don't think that's a bad thing, dismissing the vast majority, and in 2 years it'll be 80% like Harris County, then you're part of the problem. It's like in L.A. when the DA said, "Hey, we just have a disagreement over who the victim is." Because, remember, in these urban areas, they've already failed families. They've already failed the kids in school. They've already failed the fight against drugs. And so they failed for economic opportunity. So why shouldn't we fail them in the criminal justice system as well, where that's usually their last chance to turn around? And now we're saying, oh, we're going to fail you there too.
Yeah.
You'll commit as much crime as you want.
And then what's your response then to the AOCs and the Kamala Harrises of the world who get on their Instagram live feeds and gaslight the American people into thinking that this rising crime narrative is being grossly exaggerated, right? They're saying, "Oh, you guys are crazy. The rising crime is a farce. Like it's totally malarkey," as Joe Biden would say. Like, we're looking around and we're seeing a rise in crime, and they're getting up on their massive podiums and their massive audiences and telling us that we are full of crap.
Well, the AOCs of this world are from our perspective, we just can't understand them because they are the left of the left. I mean, we've now reached the point where Nancy Pelosi is not really considered left anymore. And, before the AOCs of the world, Nancy Pelosi was considered the hard left. And, we've really entered the Alice in Wonderland phase of politics if we now are saying that that Nancy Pelosi is no longer part of the far left. It's just incredible because, they have this double standard for everybody. They have a standard for them and they have a standard for everybody else. Mm-hmm. It's just political rhetoric over what you see. I mean, I wrote an article recently that says you can believe your lying eyes. And this is just a continuation of the cycle. And the cycle that we saw in the 60s where we felt safe, so we softened crime laws, and then we had a uptick in crime that became really bad. And so we had a backlash, and we had these strong criminal justice reform, and that's what brought us Reagan. We're going to have that again. I was surprised that it didn't happen in this election, but if they don't change policy, this is not sustainable. And so AOC can say, don't believe what you're seeing all she wants, but at some point the dam is going to break because it's just not sustainable.
Right. You would have thought that they already hit rock bottom whenever there were autonomous zones in Portland during the Summer of Love, but apparently there is a farther bottom to reach. We have been speaking to Ken Good. He is a Texas bail attorney and board member of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. I have really enjoyed having you on the program this morning. Hope to get you on our morning show soon. Tim Jones would love to talk to you about this. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a privilege.
You have a wonderful rest of your Saturday.
You too. Bye.